Think for a moment. Think about how often you reach for something that promises immediate relief, comfort, or pleasure. Not because you need it, not because it matters, but because it feels good in that moment. Imagine a world where pain is avoided at all costs, where discomfort is treated as a flaw, where boredom feels unbearable, and where happiness is reduced to constant stimulation. Now ask yourself a difficult question. What if this endless pursuit of pleasure is not freeing us, but slowly enslaving us? Imagine living in a society where no chains are visible, where no dictator needs to shout orders, where no violence is required to enforce obedience. A society where people willingly surrender their attention, their discipline, and their inner strength in exchange for comfort. Aldous Huxley warned us about this long before it became reality. What makes his warning so unsettling is not that it predicts oppression, but that it predicts participation. It reveals how we slowly and willingly take part in our own captivity without even realizing it. This is not just philosophy. This is not abstract theory. This is about your daily choices, your habits, and the invisible forces shaping your mind. The way you spend your attention, the way you avoid discomfort, the way pleasure quietly becomes the center of your life. Today, pleasure no longer looks like indulgence. It looks like entertainment, distraction, convenience, and endless gratification. And that is precisely what makes it so dangerous. Huxley understood something essential about human nature. Human beings do not need to be violently controlled if they can be gently seduced. People are not oppressed by pain, but by pleasure. Not silenced by fear, but distracted by comfort. Pleasure in itself is not the enemy. The danger begins when pleasure becomes the highest value, when it replaces meaning, discipline, and purpose, when feeling good becomes more important than becoming something. Modern psychology confirms what ancient philosophers already suspected. A life devoted solely to pleasure does not lead to fulfillment, it leads to emptiness. Dopamine rewards without effort weaken motivation. Comfort without challenge erodes resilience. Never in history has pleasure been so accessible, and never have so many people felt anxious, lost, and disconnected. This is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. Carl Jung warned that what we refuse to confront within ourselves will eventually appear outside as fate. When discomfort is avoided, when boredom is eliminated, when silence becomes unbearable, the unconscious grows restless. We become dependent on stimulation to escape our own thoughts. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the capacity for deep reflection disappears. When pleasure dominates attention, truth no longer feels urgent. Wisdom feels boring. Self-mastery feels unnecessary. And without realizing it, people trade freedom for convenience. Ask yourself honestly, how often do you choose what is easy over what is meaningful? How often do you escape discomfort instead of learning from it? These questions feel uncomfortable for a reason. They touch the core of personal responsibility. And what we are uncovering here goes far beyond individual habits. It extends into culture, technology, and the very structure of modern life. There is no need for prisons or visible masters when desire itself becomes the leash. Modern slavery does not demand obedience through violence. It invites compliance through comfort. When pleasure is abundant and easily accessible, resistance feels unnecessary, even foolish. Why rebel when you are entertained? Why question when you are distracted? Modern neuroscience helps us understand how this works on a biological level. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation, was never designed for constant stimulation. It evolved to reward effort, exploration, and survival. When pleasure becomes immediate and continuous, the brain recalibrates. What once felt satisfying becomes dull. What once required effort now feels unbearable. This creates a cycle of craving, consumption, and emptiness. Viktor Frankl, who endured immense suffering, observed something crucial. Humans can endure almost any pain if they find meaning in it, but they collapse when life feels meaningless. A pleasure-driven existence strips life of meaning because meaning demands responsibility, patience, and sometimes suffering. Pleasure asks nothing from us except submission. Think about how often discomfort is framed as failure. Boredom is eliminated. Silence is feared. Waiting is intolerable. Even sadness is medicated away as quickly as possible. Yet philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche warned that comfort weakens the soul. Strength is not built in ease, but in struggle. When a society removes all friction, it also removes growth. This is where modern technology amplifies Huxley's warning. Algorithms learn your desires faster than you understand them yourself. They do not force you to watch, scroll, or consume. They simply offer what feels good again and again until choice dissolves into habit. Freedom slowly transforms into reflex. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we avoid. When pleasure becomes the primary escape, the shadow grows stronger. Unprocessed fear, anger, insecurity, and loneliness do not disappear. They are buried under stimulation. And buried things do not die. They wait. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat in silence without reaching for a screen? When was the last time you endured boredom without escaping it? These moments reveal how dependent we have become on pleasure to regulate our inner world. Huxley's vision of modern slavery is terrifying precisely because it feels voluntary. People love their chains because those chains feel like comfort. They feel like choice. Yet the cost is subtle but profound. Attention spans shrink. Critical thinking fades. Inner life becomes shallow. Individuals become easier to guide, easier to predict, easier to control. This does not mean pleasure must be rejected entirely. Ancient philosophers like Epicurus warned against excess, teaching that true pleasure comes from simplicity, self-control, and freedom from unnecessary desire. The distortion occurs when pleasure is divorced from wisdom, when pleasure is no longer a tool, but a master. The question becomes unavoidable. If pleasure is shaping our behavior, who is deciding what we desire? And what happens to a society when its people no longer tolerate discomfort long enough to seek truth? Culture reveals its values not through what it praises, but through what it avoids. Today, discomfort is treated as an enemy. Effort is seen as a burden. Discipline is framed as oppression. Sacrifice feels offensive in a world trained to expect immediate reward. Huxley foresaw a civilization where people would be conditioned from an early age to desire what enslaves them, not through force, but through repetition. When pleasure becomes the primary currency of value, everything reorganizes around it. Education becomes entertainment. Relationships become transactional. Work becomes unbearable unless constantly rewarded with stimulation. Eric Fromm warned that modern humans risk shifting from a state of being into a state of having. Identity becomes defined by consumption rather than character. The question quietly changes from who am I becoming to what am I getting. When this happens, life becomes louder but flatter, busier but emptier. This is why so many people feel exhausted despite living easier lives than any generation before them. Pleasure without purpose drains energy instead of restoring it. When every moment must be enjoyable, the pressure to feel good becomes overwhelming. Anxiety grows not because life is harder, but because tolerance for discomfort disappears. Consider relationships. When pleasure is the priority, commitment feels restrictive. Depth requires patience. Love demands vulnerability and endurance. A pleasure-driven mindset seeks constant novelty. As soon as difficulty appears, escape feels justified. Over time, bonds weaken, loneliness increases, and intimacy is replaced by convenience. The same pattern appears in work and personal growth. Mastery requires repetition, frustration, and failure. But a mind conditioned by instant gratification resists long-term effort. The result is a generation with limitless access to information, but little wisdom. Endless potential, yet chronic dissatisfaction. Huxley feared that people would lose the ability to think critically not because they were forbidden to think, but because thinking would feel too slow, too uncomfortable, too unrewarding compared to pleasure. When attention is fragmented, depth becomes impossible. And without depth, truth loses its power. Soren Kierkegaard described despair as the sickness of a self that does not want to be itself. Pleasure becomes a way to escape that confrontation. Distraction offers relief, but relief is not healing. It is postponement. Ask yourself something important. If all pleasure were removed from your life for a moment, what would remain? What values would guide you? What meaning would sustain you? These are not abstract questions. They determine whether you live as a conscious participant in your life or as a passive consumer of experiences. Modern slavery thrives where awareness fades. It does not require evil intentions. It requires numbness. When people stop feeling deeply, questioning deeply, and committing deeply, control becomes effortless. Not imposed from above, but accepted from within. The system that thrives on pleasure does not survive because it is forced upon us. It survives because it is welcomed. The most effective form of control is the one we participate in willingly, believing it is freedom. When happiness is conditioned to consumption, obedience no longer feels like obedience, feels like choice. The chains are invisible because they are psychological. They are woven into habits, desires, and expectations. Once internalized, external control becomes unnecessary. This is modern slavery in its most subtle form. Not being forced against your will, but having your will shaped before you realize it exists. Psychologist B.F. Skinner demonstrated that behavior can be shaped more effectively through reward than punishment. Pleasure conditions faster than pain. Rewards create repetition. Repetition becomes identity. Eventually, a person no longer asks why they behave a certain way. They simply say, "This is who I am." But who you are may be nothing more than a pattern reinforced thousands of times. When discomfort is avoided, difficult truths are rejected. When pleasure is prioritized, values become flexible. Truth becomes what feels good rather than what is real. And when feelings become the highest authority, manipulation becomes effortless. Nietzsche warned that humanity risks becoming weak not because of suffering, but because of the absence of meaningful struggle. Without resistance, the will decays. Without challenge, the spirit softens. A life without friction may feel pleasant, but it lacks depth, gravity, and direction. Even outrage has become a form of pleasure. Anger provides stimulation. Validation provides dopamine. Suffering itself can be commodified when it attracts attention. People feel constantly engaged yet deeply empty, connected yet isolated. Carl Jung would describe this as a collective imbalance between consciousness and the unconscious. When a culture suppresses discomfort, the unconscious seeks expression through anxiety, addiction, and despair. These are not personal failures. They are symptoms of a culture that has lost its relationship with meaning. Modern individuals are told they must always be happy, always satisfied, always entertained. But this expectation is inhuman. Life includes loss, effort, confusion, and pain. When these experiences are denied, people lose the ability to integrate them. Instead of growth, there is avoidance. Instead of wisdom, there is escape. Ask yourself honestly, who benefits from a population that cannot tolerate boredom, silence, or frustration? Who gains power when attention is fragmented and desire is endless? These questions are not conspiratorial. They are psychological. Power naturally flows toward those who can shape attention. But awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize a pattern, it begins to lose its grip. The moment you question your impulses, you reclaim a portion of your freedom. Huxley did not write to condemn humanity. He wrote to warn it, and warning implies choice. You are not powerless in this system. But freedom requires something modern culture rarely encourages. It requires restraint. It requires discipline. It requires the courage to endure discomfort long enough to rediscover meaning. Pleasure is not the enemy. Unconscious pleasure is. When pleasure replaces purpose, slavery begins. When pleasure serves purpose, freedom returns. True freedom does not emerge from unlimited pleasure. It emerges from conscious limitation, from reclaiming authority over attention. Attention is the most valuable currency of the modern world. Whoever controls it shapes perception, desire, and behavior. Discomfort forces awareness. Silence reveals what noise conceals. Boredom exposes what distraction hides. When these experiences are embraced rather than avoided, depth returns. Viktor Frankl taught that meaning is found not in pleasure, but in responsibility. Responsibility requires effort. Effort requires discomfort. A person who cannot endure discomfort cannot commit to anything larger than themselves. Modern slavery thrives on the absence of commitment. Predictability makes control simple, but discipline creates unpredictability. Values replace impulse. Awareness replaces reflex. This is the quiet rebellion. Choosing focus when distraction is available. Choosing meaning when ease is tempting. These choices reshape identity over time. Identity is not what you claim to value. It is what you repeatedly choose. If the comfort disappeared tomorrow, what within you would remain strong? Your answer reveals where your freedom truly lives. Freedom is not something given by society, technology, or comfort. It is something practiced daily through awareness. Each time you resist an impulse, each time you choose meaning over ease, you strengthen the part of yourself that cannot be owned or controlled. The path away from modern slavery does not begin in the world. It begins in the mind, and that realization, more than any pleasure, has the power to set you free.